Thank you, Anne-Marie, for that introduction. So good morning. I guess it's still morning. I would say good afternoon. Good morning. I'm Rachel, and it's definitely a pleasure being here today. I just want to let you all know I also come from a community college. I graduated at the Antelope Valley College, where when I was currently going to school as a student at a community college, I was working as a pharmacy technician, and I wanted to increase my pay scale, so by going back and getting my associate's degree, I would have that opportunity. But while I was there, I actually discovered my passion for literature and reading, and I decided to actually pursue my higher education. And I do teach here at Porterville College. I teach English as well as English at Bakersfield City College. And today I'm going to be talking about Bittersweet Death and Sappho's Aphrodite. So the first question I have is, and probably what you are all wondering, is who is Sappho? Well, today I picked up a book at the Porterville bookstore, and it's actually translations by Mary Bernard. And I thought her foreword, when I was glancing at it, was very interesting, so I want to kind of read what she has to say. She says in her foreword, "Who is Sappho? A lyricist, a great beauty, no great beauty, a rumor, a writer of cultist hymns, a scandal, a fame, a bitchy sister to a silly brother, a head mistress, a mystic, a mistress of a poet, a pervert, a suicide for love of a ferryman." She also says, I'm going to skip down, we can agree that she's a lyricist and a Greek. The rest is speculation. So that's what we have with Sappho, and that's coming from the translation, the forward from Mary Bernard's translation. So who is Sappho? And we speculate that she was born on the Isle of Lesbos around 630 BC. She died around 570 BC. Some say that she surpassed women of her time in poetry, and some compare her to the Homer of women. But rather than focusing on war and battle, Sappho was a poetess who mainly wrote about love and desire, and many of her poems speak of infatuation and love for various women. We also speculate that she was married to someone of high political rank. We speculate that that could be the reason of her exile to Sicily between 604 BC and 594 BC. We do know that she has a daughter. She speaks lovingly of her in her poems, her daughter Cleis. And her lyrics were composed to be sung with the company of a lyre. There's also the myth of her death, that she falls deeply in love in her older age. She falls deeply in love with the young Phaon, and he does not return her love, so she leaps off the cliff into the ocean to her death. So some say that Sappho gave us the word bittersweet in her fragment 130. I'm going to read that to you in ancient Greek. It's eros de mute hos lismilis done gluco pykron amachanon or peton. And the word you want to look at is glucopycron. So we've seen this word before, right? If you want to know how much sugar is in an ingredient, you look at how much glucose it has. So it translates as sweet bitter, right? And Sappho gives us that word. And who doesn't love the idea of bittersweet love, right? She also is she's influenced literature. Some writers that I compare to her, that I find her in, is Edgar Allan Poe. And if you're not familiar with some of these writers, that's okay. You can research on them later. Edgar Allan Poe writes one of his first poems, A la Raft. He footnotes Sappho's myth of her death. And you see her in H.D. Doolittle, The Wise Sappho, Anne Carson. There's also a poem called Ode to Sappho by Elizabeth Smith, written in 1848. But I think for me, my favorite influence in literature would be J.D. Salinger. He's the writer of Catcher in the Rye. But he uses her fragment, Raise High the Roof Beam Carpenter, for his title. And Raise High the Roof Beam Carpenter is one of her marriage hymns that she writes. And he also talks about her again in his novel, Franny and Zoe. So there's various ways that we see her in literature, and right now I would say Salinger is probably the one I enjoy the most to read. Plato calls her the 10th muse. He says, some say there are 9 muses. How careless. Look, Sappho of Lesbos is the 10th. And we know that Sappho loved beauty along with the lyre, and she dedicated all of her poems to Aphrodite and the loves, and she made a girl's beauty and graces the pretext of most of her songs. We also know that she was a famous poet in her time, so she was well known. This is my collage of Sappho. As you can see, Sappho is, long after her death, she's an inspiration to various artists. And I kind of wanted to go through and create a time frame of images we see Sappho. And so the first image, it's going to wiggle, there you go, is a red vase dated 470 BC. And then you have the Roman bust of Sappho, about 5th century. And we have our Victorian Sappho. And then this is a depiction of the myth of her death. You can't see it because it's covered, but she's holding a lyre and she's about to take her leap of death into the ocean. Perhaps my favorite artist that depicts Sappho is John Godward. He titles his work In the Days of Sappho. And for me, I like the way that he depicts her. She's often laying down, holding her lyre, walking with women or talking with them. And for me, he captures the tenderness that I see in Sappho. And she often, in some of her depictions, she always looks like she's in deep thought, which is the way that I guess I perceive Sappho to be. So the way that her fragments work, they are written on papyrus, which it's a very fragile paper. So if you look at the images, you can see that some parts are broken. Like the top one, you have the whole chunk missing, and the one beneath it, there's kind of the gaps that you have in between. And it was written in ancient Greek. She wrote in ancient Greek, and we know that there was about 5 volumes of her work in the Alexandria Library. But during the Christian riots, the library was burned down, and we lost most of her work. But the best way to get a good sense of Sappho is to actually not just hear facts about her or speculations of her, but to actually read some of her poetry. So I've selected some of my favorite love poems that Sappho has. So and the way I'm going to do is I'll read it in ancient Greek, at least the 2 smaller ones, and then I'll translate them in English. And the copies that I have the translation I have up there is David Campbell's. It's from the Loeb edition that I have. So fragment 52 is kind of one of my favorite ones. It's the first fragment that I learned how to read and translate in ancient Greek from. So it says, in Greek it says, Pasaindo doke mamoreno dus pacheia. And then there's the second one where it says the same thing. It says, but it has different ending. It says, Pasaindo doke mamoreno duse pacheia. Do you see the word with the 2 crosses that surround it? Well, that is a hapax, meaning that we only see it once. Sappho uses this word once, and we don't see it again. So we don't actually know what that means, but we can speculate. So in translation, what it says is, I do not expect to touch the sky with my 2, deuce, we know that's 2, right? And the pacheia is the part we're not sure of, but we're assuming it's something that you can touch with, so your hands or your arms. But the way I like to read it is, I do not expect to touch the sky with my 2 hands. And I think it's just a beautiful fragment. The other fragment I want to share with you is fragment 47, and it reads, Eros tetnaximoi verinas hos animos kat urus terusin empentan. And it translates as, love shook my heart like wind falling on oaks on a mountain. There is other translations where it says, love shook my mind. And the fun thing about this preparing for this presentation was I actually had to take out my Greek lexicon, which was sitting dusty in the shelf, and I got to dust it off and open it back up. And the word that I was interested in was ferinas, because some translators translate it like David Campbell does. He uses the word heart. But some use the word mind. So I actually looked that up, and it does translate as mind. The word ferinas comes up as mind. An interesting thing, though, when I was looking at the word next to it, is ferinas apatal. which translates as the seduced mind, which in Greek I think is really interesting that they can just kind of have a specific word for that idea, right? The seduced mind. And that's just a little something I wanted to share with you in my research that I was doing, breaking this apart. So as you can see, some of the fragments that she has and some of the poems she has are just a couple of words, not even full sentences. And then you'll have some fragments where you'll have a couple of lines. And then there are some of her longer fragments that we have, like fragment 31. And I'm going to read that to you. It says, "He seems as fortunate as the gods to me, the man who sits opposite you and listens nearby to your sweet voice. Your lovely laughter, truly, that sets my heart trembling in my breast. For when I look at you for a moment, then it is no longer able to speak. My tongue has snapped, at once a subtle fire stolen beneath my flesh. I see nothing with my eyes, my ears hum, sweat pours from me, a trembling seizes me all over. I am greener than grass, and it seems to me that I'm a little short of dying. But all can be endured since, even a poor man." And so you see the ellipsis, the dots that you have, and that indicates that these are parts of the fragments that are missing, that we don't have the complete fragment. It's just, those are the parts that are missing. This poem that she's writing is a poem of jealousy, a description of jealousy, and the physical effects of falling in love and the emotional effects as well. So there's this man sitting close enough to you that he can hear your lovely voice and your laughter. It makes my heart beat. And she talks about her flesh feeling like it's burning. And how many of you have been there, right? Where you sit there and kind of the person that you're in love with is chatting up with someone else, like, you start to tremble, right? You start to feel that heart beating, maybe even the hot flames rising up out of anger. And she can no longer speak. When you see the love, you make eye contact with them, you lose all words, right? She's trembling from maybe the fear, and she's greener than grass. And some translators even use the word pale, like the feeling when your blood just drops and you turn pale. And she describes it as near death, the feeling of being near death. So even in fragments, you can see that her poetry is very beautiful. This is one more that I wanted to share with you because it's another one of my favorite poems. And again, it's just a picture of the fragments. If you see how they are, they're just kind of broken up into pieces, and that's what we have with the dots that showing that they've been taken out. So we don't actually know how it starts, but what we have is, and honestly, I wish I were dead. She was leaving me with many tears and saying this, "Oh, what bad luck has been ours, Sappho. Truly, I leave you against my will." I replied to her this, "Go and fare well and remember me, for you know how we cared for you. If not, why then, I want to remind you, and the good times we had. You put many wreaths of violet and roses, and together by my side, round your tender neck, to put many woven garlands, made from flowers, and with much flowery perfume, fit for a queen, you anointed yourself, and on soft beds you would satisfy longing for tender." This poem, with the research that I've done, is perhaps one of her younger lovers who has come of age and now must be married off. And so the idea that she can no longer visit with Sappho, she also was known to teach poetry to the daughters of the nobles. So that's just an example of some of her love poems, right? And I think they're absolutely beautiful. Yes, I forget that I have this slide, and now that it's on big screen, I feel a little uncomfortable about it, right? So what I do have are images of my trip in 2014 in Greece, Athens. I was an initiative grant winner, and I was given the opportunity to travel to study to Greece to study, and I participated I was a participant of Greek Site on Study, and I had the opportunity to study at the Norwegian Institute of Athens and utilize the library there. And I just want to let you all know that these are opportunities that are out there for you as students as well. So you should never be afraid to try, because you don't know what opportunities you have and you know what can become of them. So I just urge you all, while you're students, there's so much grants and programs for students to travel and discover their different passions. So take the opportunity while you still can as students. So why is this picture up here? Let me remember that. So during my time there, I studied love in Greek antiquity. And it was there that I did my research and my final chapter for my MA thesis. And I remember one of the seminars, we kind of went over the myth of Aphrodite and Adonis. And during that seminar, it dawned on me, you know what, I think Sappho has a myth that she refers, a fragment where she refers to that myth. So for me, finding that myth or that coming up kind of sparked an interest in my studies in Sappho. And what it did was it gave me a big piece that I didn't realize was missing in my understanding of Sappho, because Aphrodite is very significant to Sappho. And in some ways, it allowed me to understand Sappho's use of Aphrodite on that trip in Greece. So the myth of Aphrodite and Adonis is of a goddess that falls deeply in love with a mortal man. And there's other places, so we see it in Sappho's fragment, and we also see it in Ovid's Metamorphosis, but that's much later. And what Ovid does tell us about Adonis is more about his parents and how his mother claimed that she was prettier than Aphrodite, who Aphrodite, not like being the goddess of love and beauty, did not like that. So she tricks her into sleeping with her own father, which, yes, I know, I think the same thing, strange, weird, okay, but it's kind of something you see in ancient culture. And then she turns Adonis' mother into a tree. 9 months later, the tree bursts and Adonis is born. And so Aphrodite puts him in a chest and decides to give him to Persephone in the underworld to take care of him while she can. And the two women fall in love with Adonis as a young boy, and there becomes a dispute. And so Zeus kind of has to come in and he says, okay, so because you guys are having issues, Persephone, you have him for 6 months in the underworld, and then the other 6 months, Aphrodite, he can be in the upper world with you. So you kind of get the idea of the story of the 6 seasons with Ovid's myth. And so there's various forms, and it's just interesting to see the way that the myths just travel and change. So moving on, I think Aphrodite, we need to kind of get a description of who she is, what is she really about. And Sappho describes her in various ways, but things that we do know about Aphrodite is that she's the daughter of Zeus. She's the goddess of love and lust and beauty. And she's basically the most beautiful goddess of all the goddesses, and she's gorgeous. Anyone who sees her desires her. They even say that she wears a girdle of desire that, you know, she puts on, and so anyone who sees her is deeply attracted to her. Sappho describes her as the gold-throned Aphrodite. She also calls her the Lady of Beauty, and that Sappho rides in on a chariot that is winged. She also calls her a smiling mortal face. So it's not a surprise that the other goddesses would be jealous of Aphrodite, especially Hera, who is Zeus's wife. And Hera has a son, Hephaestus, who is kind of ugly. He's a dope. He's, you know, just not attractive, the least attractive of all the gods, right? And maybe out of jealousy, she makes Zeus agree to, let's make Aphrodite marry him, right? And I don't know why Zeus would agree to this, but he does. He agrees to, maybe not to upset Hera. So he agrees to let them have a marriage. And so Aphrodite's beautiful, right? And she ends up having an affair with Ares, the god of war. I feel like I'm gossiping up here. Or giving you guys the detail of some really good soap opera, but this is the way it goes. So she has an affair with Ares. He's the god of war, and you can only imagine he's probably well-built, very attractive, completely opposite of what she's married to. And I kind of don't blame her for the affair. Maybe I shouldn't say that. But so when you're dealing with the gods, you always have the gods, especially the goddess of love and beauty. You'll run into these issues, right? And Aphrodite, though, she's a pretty tricky girl. She's pretty tricky. she not only has love and beauty that she has power over, she not only has beauty, but she has the power to make people fall in love. She can inflict love on others, right? When you think of the Cupid and the arrow. But keep that in mind when we're thinking about Sappho. That's really important. So just keep that in mind, the idea that Aphrodite can inflict love on people. So she likes to play games. Aphrodite also likes to make the other gods and goddesses fall in love with mortals. And you can only imagine that's probably not a very good idea, considering that immortals live forever and mortals will eventually die. So it doesn't make a really good balance. The other interesting thing is that Aphrodite isn't exactly shielded from this idea of falling in love, that there's this eros that she can't even control, right? When I say eros, we mean love. The eros that she can't even control if it's inflicted upon her. So with that being said, you have Aphrodite, who falls hopelessly in love with Adonis, right? And Adonis is a handsome young hunter. He's fit, he's attractive, and Aphrodite is basically head over heels for him. And oddly enough, though, Adonis, he isn't as into her as she is into him, the goddess of love and beauty. I don't know what's wrong, but during this, what he liked to do, what he was more interested in doing was hunting, and that's what he would rather spend his time doing, was out there hunting. And so one day, Aphrodite urges him to stay with her, not leave, and don't go hunting, just, kind of stay with me today, we can cuddle or something. He's like, no, I'm gonna go hunting. I would rather go hunting, that's what I wanna do. And so against her heat or warning, he decides to go hunting. And while he's out hunting, he runs into a wild boar, and he tries to attack it, but the wild boar actually fights back, and it wounds him. And it's not just any wound, it's a deathly wound. And possibly, here we go back to the gossip and the soap opera, possibly it's Ares, right? Her jealous lover that's transformed himself into wild boar, and that's one speculation we have, is one part of the myth. But Aphrodite hears about this, and she hears that Adonis is dying, but by the time that she reaches him, there's nothing that she can do to save him. So instead, what she does is she takes his blood and pours it over a flower, and he then turns into the flower, and so every spring, when the flowers bloom, Adonis can return to her in the form of the flower. So this is an interesting idea. The women in ancient Greece, they celebrated the Adonis religion. It's a mysterious religion for women, and that women took part in. And going back to Sappho now and her fragment on that, Sappho's fragment 140 says, "Delicate Adonis is dying, Cytherea. What are we to do? Beat your breasts, girls, and tear your clothes." Cytherea is another name for Aphrodite. And so this is presumably a dialogue between the worshippers and Aphrodite, where she says, "Beat your breasts, girls, and tear your clothes." That's a sign of them mourning with Aphrodite. And interestingly, in Greek, we know that this is the earliest mention in writing of the Adonis cult. And we do know that the dying of Adonis was fully developed with the young girls that surrounded the poet Sappho. Another fragment she has on it is fragment 97, and it says, "It is not easy for us to rival goddesses in loveliness of figure. Of Adonis, Aphrodite poured nectar from a golden, her hand persuasion." And that's just another example of perhaps the Adonis ritual. We have the golden nectar, springtime, and the festivities that go with that. Oh, yeah, I just want to say, also, so during this Adonis religion, I think it was about a week-long festival that took place, and during that time, the women would just mourn and cry. And some scholars say that they did this as a form of release because women weren't exactly allowed to express their emotions. I don't know how certain that is, but it is a speculation that we have. But to bring in fertility and to welcome the spring, and it's symbolic for Adonis coming again and mourning for his death as well. So this is another fragment that shows more of that Adonis religion. It's fragment 2, and it says, "Hither to me from Crete to this holy temple. Where is your delightful groves of apple trees and altars smoking with incense? Therein cold water babbles through apple branches, and the whole place is shadowed by roses. And from the shimmering leaves, the sleep of enchantment comes down. Thereinto a meadow, where horses graze, blossoms with spring flowers, and the wind blows gently. There, Cypris, take and pour gracefully into golden cups nectar that is mingled with our festivities." And so this to me is just more of that Adonis religion. You have come to me from Crete, this holy temple. You have the altars smoking, shadowed by roses, horses grazing on blossom springs, the golden cups of nectar mingled with our festivities of springtime, and all this is kind of typical things that we see with the Adonis religion. This for me, Sappho's hymn to Aphrodite is kind of where I'm going to go back and connect it, where you have a changed Aphrodite. And for me, this fragment shows when Aphrodite actually becomes what I like to call Sappho's Aphrodite. She says, "Throned immortal Aphrodite, daughter of Zeus, I entreat you, do not overpower my heart, mistress, with ache and anguish, but come here. If ever you passed, you heard my voice from afar and came, leaving your father's golden house with chariot yoked. Beautiful swift sparrow, whirring fast beating wings, brought you above the earth, down from heaven, through the mid-air, and soon arrived. And you, blessed one, with a smile on your immortal face, asked what was the matter with me this time, and why was I calling this time, and what in my maddened heart I most wished to happen for myself. Who am I to pursue you this time, to lead you back to her love? Who wrongs you, Sappho? If she runs away, soon she shall pursue. If she does not accept gifts, why then she shall give them instead. If she does not love, soon she shall fall in love ever against her will. Come to me now again and deliver me from oppressive anxiety. Fulfill all that my heart longs to fulfill, and you yourself will be my fellow fighter." So for me, this is the fragment that kind of, like I said earlier, turns an Aphrodite into Sappho's Aphrodite. And I'll go through and explain this. So first we know that she's asking Aphrodite, don't make me feel this pain. Don't make me feel this anguish. Because remember, Aphrodite is the inflictor of love. So she's asking her, like, don't do it to him. Don't make me fall in love with this girl. And now she doesn't even love me back. So kind of take this away. And you have a dialogue between Sappho and Aphrodite. Aphrodite asking Sappho what she wants. And she's not grumpy about it. She has a smile on her face while she's asking it. She says, "Who do I need to make fall in love with you now this time?" You know, this has been a recurring, this isn't the first time Sappho has asked. Who wrongs you? If she runs from you, well, now she's going to be the one pursuing you. And if she doesn't want to accept your gifts, well, she's going to be the one bestowing them now. And if she doesn't love you, well, now she's going to love you against her will. And she says, Sappho says, "Come and deliver me." And she calls Aphrodite her fellow fighter. And so this goes back to the myth of Adonis for me, because without Aphrodite going through the emotions of longing, like she does with Adonis, and feeling what it feels to lose love, then she's not capable of understanding what Sappho's saying. But now she can sympathize through the myth of Adonis. We know that we see her longing and we see her dealing with loss. So she kind of becomes the perfect person to ask for. She can sympathize. You know what it feels like to not have love returned. So don't make me go through this same emotion. You know what it feels like to have loss. So please don't make me go through the same emotions. So for me, this fragment is huge, and it plays a big role on Sappho and Aphrodite and their relationship together. Okay, so another slide that seems out of place. So we're going to put Sappho and Aphrodite just on pause for a second. And these are pictures of my trip in Italy. And during that trip, we studied the Etruscans, and so, like Anne-Marie said, I was an NEH scholar, National Endowment for Humanities, and we studied the legacy of ancient Italy, the Etruscans, and early Rome. So this trip started in Lugano, Switzerland, and we made our way through Italy and ended up in Rome. And during this trip, we visit mostly, it was Etruscan sites, and one thing we had to do on this trip was come up with a research that we would like to research and discover more about the Etruscans, and at the end of the seminar, we were all to give presentations. And when we reached Rome, we had about 8 days to do research at the American Academy of Rome and utilize the library. And let me tell you, I was completely lost. I didn't know what I would research. I knew very little about the Etruscans, still know very little about the Etruscans. And I didn't know what I would do. So initially, to get the grant, what I had to do was write an essay talking about what I would possibly like to research with them. And during the time when I wrote my essay, I talked about Sappho and maybe the Etruscan art and perhaps the influence of Sappho in the Etruscan art. But when I got there and actually saw the art, it was like not going to happen. So I had to find a new research topic, and I didn't know, at this point I didn't know what I would do, how I could bring it all together. There were 3 of us that were English majors. One decided she was going to do Shakespeare's The Rape of Lucrece, because that's Etruscan. And the other decided to do pictures of art and using it as a writing activity. And so I was just kind of lost. I didn't know what I would do. So what do we know about the Etruscans? And the Etruscans were the ancient people of Italy. They were very focused on the afterlife. So the images you see are of tombs. And so it's just kind of tomb after tomb. And I believe that these pictures are from Orvieto. And the one with it looks like a rock pillow, and where they would lay the bodies. So they were very much focused on the afterlife, much like the Egyptians. And what's amazing about these Etruscan tombs is they, especially the ones in Tarquinia, they're very painted and very beautiful. And what they would do was put household items inside of these tombs. And we don't know what their houses look like because we don't have ruins left from the Etruscans, their houses, but we do have their tombs. And they would decorate them with household items. And the other thing is the Etruscans don't really have writing like the Greeks do, like poetry or philosophy. They have inscriptions in tombs, but not necessarily writing. We kind of know who the tomb belongs to. And the other interesting thing about the Etruscans is they don't have infant tombs. So it's the idea that if you're not at least 13, maybe 13 and up, you're not eligible to reach the afterlife because you're not fully human. So they very much focused on the afterlife and entering the afterlife. Some of the tombs even have painted doors, and you see images of the people, the Etruscans or whoever it is, the images of them entering that door, so it's the idea that they're entering the afterlife. So they were very focused on that. And I still have a question, but we will. So this is another picture of a tomb. And this tomb was in Tarquinia, and they varied in size, as you can see, and some of the tombs had chambers that would actually lead into other chambers. And so they would keep household items. One thing they would have is this ritual breakage, where they would break good items like vases or whatever, break them, and it would become symbolic that these vases were no longer to be used for the living, but rather the dead. One of the other things they had was upside downness. So you would have a vase that was buried upside down, the idea that if you flip it, it would enter the afterlife. So this is just an example, and you can even see the paintings that they had in these tombs. They were very decorated. The other thing they had were burial items. So what you have on one side, these on your, is it your right, your left? I'm not sure. But this side has bronze mirrors, and it was a very popular thing that you would see in a woman's tomb. If you're a woman, you would be buried with something like your mirrors or your vanity set, things like that. And if you were a man or you were a soldier, you would be buried with your armor, your shield. And these personal items also told of your status. And just a little bit of extra information, they did find, in November, they found a tomb that was unlooted and intact, and it's about 2,300 years old, and it had armor in it. And so they assumed that it was a man that was buried in there. And they did their tests, and I don't know how they do bone scans, whatever it is, and they just found out that it was not a man at all, it was actually a woman. And since it is Women's Month, you know, the Etruscans, if you were a woman, you were allowed to participate in war, and they assumed that she was a princess warrior, that the tomb that they found. So that's just a little extra information, and I will get to Sappho. So women, mirrors, and men, shields, stuff like that, okay? So the Etruscan mirror isn't the way that we're thinking, with the clear reflection. It's bronze, and it would have a depiction on the outside and on the inside. If you polished it really well, you can kind of see the reflection. So the mirror that I found that was helpful to me and kind of sparked my research was a depiction of Turan, the goddess of love and fertility, very much similar to the goddess Aphrodite. The Etruscan goddess is Turan. And what I did find was this depiction, which, yes, if you guessed it, it's the Etruscan Turan and a Tunis. So for the Greeks, we know that Sappho mentions the Adonis cult in her fragments, but we also know that the Greeks had depictions of it on vases and whatnot as well. So this is your Etruscan Turan and a Tunis, and we don't have writing on it, but we do have is various depictions on mirrors of this myth. And I try not to obsess over the origin of the myth, which is kind of a web that I can start spinning myself into. And out of curiosity, it's mostly I want to know, how does this myth travel in? And there is one scholar, Vandermeer, who says that he writes a paper on a Greek ritual myth in the Etruscan world. And so we know that the Greeks and the Etruscans traded like crazy, and perhaps that's one way that the Etruscans got this myth. And it makes me wonder, could Sappho have something to do with this as well? But I can't make that claim I just don't have enough evidence to make that claim. Instead, I decided to focus on Sappho's version of the myth, which has tenderness in it, the death, and the sweetness of the fragment, and the togetherness of the girls for Aphrodite, which is quite different than what you have in the Greek depictions of this myth in art. So I want to show you compare the two, the Greek depiction as well as the Etruscan. So on your right, I think, or just the colored one, right, is the Greek. And so if you look, you have Aphrodite and Adonis, and he's reaching out to her. She's reaching out to him, but he's looking the other way, and he's gazing off somewhere else. But when you look at the Etruscan one, you have them face to face. They're embracing each other, and Adonis has his arm around Turan. Turan is the one with the robe. It's the same thing again. In the Greek, you have Aphrodite looking down on him, and Adonis is turned away, looking up. And it's quite different with the Etruscan one. Again, you have the same thing. Turan is the taller one, and she has her arm around him. Their bodies are turned towards each other. They're locking eyes. And it seems to me that a Tunis is holding her veil, which is an interesting thing in the Etruscan depictions of women on sarcophagus or whatever they have. They have this thing with their veils where they hold them out. And it's something they do. It has something symbolically for a ritual, women's ritual, something. But it looks like Adonis is the one holding that veil for her, which perhaps that indicates a unity. And then lastly, my last example of this is, again, you have, they're finally facing each other. You have Adonis facing towards him, and they do look locking eyes, but still he has his body turned away from her, and there's the gap that they have. But again, if you look at the Etruscan depiction, what you have is Turan's the one sitting, and they're facing each other. He's reaching out to her. And if you look closely, you can see she's actually holding a mirror, one of those mirrors that keep occurring. And you won't find the mirrors in a man's burial, in his tombs. They were only something that you found in a woman's tomb. And they are depicted in the art. There's something with the holding and whatever's going on. So it's very symbolic, and I don't know what all of that means. But according to Vandermeer, those kind of just die out. The myth of around 200 BC, you stop seeing those. So what I do want to bring it back to is this idea, this reoccurring theme that you have with the Etruscans. This is an Etruscan sarcophagus of a married couple, and they're embracing. And so I kind of want to emphasize the idea that the Etruscans, in death, it doesn't seem such a sorrowful thing, that it's more sweet than it is bitter. And they're turned to each other hugging. And rather than separation, it seems like we have unity with the Etruscans. So unlike the Greek depictions of the myth, it's not as cold and longing, right? One thing we did have, one of the archaeologists that came and spoke to us, Anthony Tuck, I believe his name, I might be wrong. When we had a seminar, he said, the Etruscans weren't Hellenized. Rather, they took what they found, what they liked, and interpreted it their own way. So you have that with the myth of Tudon and Tunis. And I would like to tie Sappho into that somehow, but what we do have is there is a scholar who says, possibly, at least this claim is out there, okay, this is a good thing for me, that there is a mirror, an Etruscan mirror with Sappho's depiction on it. So for me, that's good enough, something to work with, right? And when I was at the American Academy of Rome, the library, I did want to look that up, and I tried my best to find the book, but I didn't actually know how to run the library. But I think it was a book that was in German, and I just couldn't locate it for some reason. But it's something that I would like to do in the future. So to just tie it all in, again, you have Sappho's fragment, delicate Adonis is dying Cytherea. What are we to do? Beat your breasts, girls, and tear your clothes. This myth is as old as the hills. And that's kind of something I need to keep reminding myself, because I tend to get lost in tracing back the origin. And where did the Etruscan get it from? Could it have been from Sappho? Did she give it to? So I try not to do that, and that's one way I tell myself, just remember that this is an old myth, and it does get transferred. But what we do have is the ancient Greek depiction gives us the longing of Aphrodite and her mortal lover Adonis, right? She's constantly lingering over him. It's the idea of the longing. And Sappho, she gives us the tender, bittersweet death of Adonis, and perhaps it is the earliest writing that we have of the Adonis-Aphrodite myth. It's certainly, we know, the earliest mention of the Adonis cult in her fragment 140. And she also shares with us an Aphrodite who can sympathize with lovers who feel pain and longing. And through Aphrodite's loss of Adonis, we have Sappho's Aphrodite, her fellow fighter. And lastly, you have the Etruscan myth of Turan and Tunis and of unity and love perhaps beyond the grave. And if we put these together as a collage, I like to think of it as a way that the stories of the past continue to influence us today in both subtle and not so subtle ways. This is just some images of, you can see we still are very influenced by Sappho and the myth of Adonis and Aphrodite today. In various ways, in art as well as in, these are a couple of paintings I did. I forgot that I had this, and I just wanted to share that with you. Yes, she inspires me as well as an artist. These are on watercolor, and they are based off of a couple of Aphrodite poems that inspired me to paint. And then you also have, very much writing on her today still. I do want to share one clip, okay? Or if I can figure out how to do this. This is an artist who is reciting this poem to music, and I like it. It's very modern, and it's the way that her poems would have been read back in her day with the lyre. To me, the man who sits across from you is a god. He listens carefully to your delicious voice and your laughter. And if I meet you suddenly, my tongue breaks off and I can't speak.
sweat brushes down on me and trembling seizes me. I'm paler than the grass drying, oh yes it seems. I'm dying, dying, dying,
She's actually reciting fragment 31, the one that I read to you. He seems as fortunate as the gods to me. And that pretty much concludes my talk. I do want to encourage you all to learn more about Sappho. And PC bookstore, the bookstore actually carries the Mary Bernard translations of her poems. So please, if you're interested, pick this book. And I believe Lori, the librarian, let me know that there are plenty of books on the Library of Sappho, right?
Well, there was 4, but some of them have already been checked out, but there's probably still a couple in the library waiting for you. And we can find all kinds of information online about this wonderful talk.
Okay, well, what I'd like to do then is if I can put some of my own books that I have on Sappho on reserve at the library with Lori. So thank you very much all for coming.